Hello and welcome to today's video. I am looking at Bayonet Charge and Remains. These are two of the poems in the conflict section. And now don't worry if you're not studying these poems, because this is a skills based video which is relevant to any essay comparing poems and actually to any literature essay. So how has this candidate got really good marks, 28 out of 30, without writing a totally awesome essay? Let's have a look at it and find out. So the first thing that we notice is that she starts with an introduction. And when I read it, the bit in yellow is the part of the introduction that does the job. And the rest of the introduction isn't really serving a proper function. Let's see if you can work out why before I tell you. Ted Hughes and Simon Armitage are both well-known poets. When writing their war poetry, they were both inspired by their own times in the army. In addition to this, Hughes was also inspired by his father, who participated in the First World War. Bayonet Charge and Remains both present the effects of war as painful and causing distress. I will further try to show this, as well as the differences in the poet's representations. So, why is it that this gets more marks? Well, hopefully you've worked out it's because it's linked to the poet's purpose. Once you start discussing the poet's purpose, you're always going to enter the top mark band. And so obviously these bits don't get so many marks because they're just facts about the authors. They're not linked to the purpose, so they're not really helping us interpret the poems. So they don't really get marked. So this is kind of wasted bit of the introduction. Now the good news is you don't get penalised for stuff that's like this wasted. The examiners are incredibly generous, so they credit you for what you actually do. Thank you, examiner, that's really kind. This part of the introduction is actually useful to the student because it reminds her, and it was a her, it reminds her what she's got to do later in the essay. Okay, this is her next paragraph, and those of you who've been following my videos on how to write about the poems will know that I ask you to use Bootsy as a planning tool. So write about the beginning, write about two language features. You have to watch my videos to work out why they're called O. The title, a structural point, and the ending. And you'll also know that I've now crossed out the T because I found when I got the essays back from my students who got top marks, 30 out of 30, boom, they did not need to write about the title. So my new teaching technique is to tell my students to booze, and that will get them through the exam. Not just set them through, sorry, that will get them top marks. Now, this student hasn't been taught that technique. She's been taught a reasonably valuable technique, which is this one, that structure is not something that most students do well, and therefore she's been told to put it in first as her first argument, which is a good bit of advice. You can do that, but I want to show why the structure point here doesn't really get many marks. And then I'm going to contrast it to a paragraph where she does it brilliantly. So let's see if you can work out why this doesn't get the marks. Bayonet Charge begins media res, which is Latin for in the middle of the action. Well done, excellent vocabulary, which instantly attracts the reader. Bit of a vague point, but okay. The poem then goes on to form three regular stanzas, excellent vocabulary. The length of the poem could reflect the short lives of many of the soldiers. Well done for using the tentative language. You can just about make the case that it's a short poem, reflects short lives of soldiers, but really stretching it a bit, isn't it? We can't be certain, even moderately certain, that that's what the poet wanted to show. Or perhaps a short amount of time the poem is reflecting and the speed at which the soldier is running. Now, if you'd looked at the rhythm of each line, you could easily relate that to the speed at which the soldier is running. Yeah, so if you'd link that to rhythm, that would have been a really valid point. But linking it to the length of the poem is actually a bit vague. The regularity of the stanzas, however, portrays the single-mindedness and order of the war. That you could get some credit for that. You could argue that it's a kind of regular meter, which shows that the soldier is being controlled by war. Um, Again, but that would come down to the rhythm, not really the length of stanzas. Um, but you'll get away with that sort of point because it is at least a bit plausible. This, however, is juxtaposed by the variance in sentence lengths, which shows the chaos of war. Um, well, does it? I mean, having varied sentence lengths doesn't normally suggest chaos, does it? Um, it's not something that is typical of most writing, and so this is stretching it a bit. Hughes also uses caesura and enjambment in order for the poem to flow, and she's put that in quotation marks because she knows this word is not real English literature vocabulary. It's kind of made up, and it doesn't help the poem flow because caesura puts full stops in the middle of lines, and that's the opposite of flow. Enjambment, you might say, does, but caesura doesn't. But again, you don't get marks taken off you for writing something that's rubbish. You just get credited for what's good. Then she talks about the tempo to increase in reflection of the action. That's not bad, and a much more specific way of explaining it would be to link this to fast pace action and then quote an example or two. So that the soldier charging, stunning the hare, charging through gunfire. You could definitely link that to tempo and the need for the soldier to escape and move quickly. But she doesn't quite do that. So this is a paragraph about structure which is overreaching, and it gets there in places, but not all the way through. Okay, in this paragraph, the next one in her essay, she makes a much better job of linking the structure of the poem to how we understand the character and the poet's purpose. Let's see how she does it. Remains, on the other hand, uses free verse and colloquial language. This may have been done to create an effect of speech. So that's her first explanation. He wants it to sound like natural speech, and for the persona to connect with the reader. And we can infer that, can't we? That if the speaker is speaking to us colloquially, we'll be able to connect with them because we also speak colloquially. By doing this, Armitage makes the reader sympathetic. So this is the wider purpose that Armitage has, and now this is gaining top marks towards the guilty soldier. So that's a brilliant bit of structure. You don't need loads of it. This next bit in white is going to be the weaker sort that's overreaching. As we saw in the last paragraph, let's check it out. This significantly longer poem, 8 stanzas, reflects the turmoil in the soldier's head. Well, that's nonsense because a one stanza poem could all be about the turmoil in the poet's head. There's nothing about being long that suggests turmoil. You have to look at any poem might be really peaceful if it's really long. Then we have paired with enjambment, which, similar to bayonet charge, increases the tempo of the piece. Yes, we could argue that enjambment increases the tempo, but why? What's the point? How does that link to our view of the soldier or Armitage's wider purpose? She hasn't said, and therefore doesn't really get any marks. However, this next bit that follows does. Let's see what she says. Lastly, Armitage uses the repetition of probably armed, possibly not. By doing so, he further reinstates the man's guilt, so that's his wider purpose, as he tries to analyze the intentions of the dead looter. So now we have a reason for that structural feature to be there, connected to Armitage's wider purpose, and she gets the marks. And again, the stuff that's reaching and a bit rubbish doesn't get any marks taken away. So there you have it, how to write about context and how not to write about context when you're comparing the poems, but indeed in any literature essay. In my next video, I will look at the rest of this essay, and hopefully I'll be savvy enough to create a link which will probably appear here somewhere, for a video for you to click on that follows on from this one. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. And if you want more, don't forget to subscribe.